Are you bad at flying your ship? Do you struggle to keep your enemies inside your firing arcs? Do you make GrumpyOldNord look like a good pilot? Well, do I have the build for you. What's up guys, my name's Stu, and yes, I made a turret build. Now, a turret build is nothing new to Star Trek Online. They've been a meme build since forever, but I made one for two reasons. One, because it was funny, and two, because I wanted to take the meme a step further. On this build, not only does every single weapon have a 360-degree firing arc, but so does every single bridge officer ability and console, which is why my friend Kyuu called it the Lazy Boat. Here she is, the Lazy Boat, or as I actually named her, the USS Fearless, which I picked because, well, when you're going into battle with nothing but turrets, it helps to be a bit fearless. This is the legendary Miracle Worker Heavy Cruiser, aka the legendary Excelsior. I picked this ship for three reasons. One, it looks fantastic. Two, it's a heavy cruiser, so its turn rate and inertia rating really aren't that great, making this ship more difficult to fly. I figured this is the kind of ship that people wouldn't want to have to worry about their firing arcs while they're flying it. And three, because it's a Miracle Worker ship, which is my favorite for energy weapon builds because I get access to mixed armament synergy and narrow sensor bands. In the forward weapon slots, I've got 4 Ba'ul Antiproton turrets. I went with Ba'ul weapons because the refractions do a decent amount of damage with cannon builds, and it gave me the excuse to use a console that I really like. These next 4 are pretty standard on pretty much all of my energy weapon builds. The Colony Deflector for the crit chance and severity it gives, the Competitive Engine for the speed buff it gives. For tactical and science characters, I'd recommend the Terran Task Force Warp Core for the buff to maximum power levels that it gives. But engineering characters really don't struggle with generating additional power. Instead, for them, I'd recommend one of these deuterium stabilized warp cores. It has a 15% reduction to weapons power cost, which is much more valuable for an engineer on an energy weapon build. And down here is the Discovery Reputation Shield for the extra damage to enemy shields it gives. In the back are more Ba'ul Antiproton turrets, plus the Ba'ul Omni Beam Array from the Lobi store. This is here for its set bonus to buff the Ba'ul Refraction proc. In devices, we've got energy amplifiers for the bonus damage, deuterium surplus for the speed buff, reactive armor catalyst for the heals just in case, Kobayashi Maru transponder for the random buffs, and red matter capacitor for the extra energy. This one really isn't that necessary, but honestly, what else am I going to put in here that's going to benefit an energy weapon build? In the consoles, first we've got Lorca's custom fire controls for the crit chance, the shield pen, and the extra weapons power. In the other universal slot, Fakiri Torment Engine. This, paired with Entropic Rider, gives your weapons an impressive amount of additional damage over time. Over here is the Ba'ul Lobi console for its massive buff to anti-proton damage, a little bit of hull cap, and because it's the other half of the set bonus. Assimilated module for more crit chance and more crit severity. Domino's passive buff to phaser damage isn't helping us here, but its click ability gives impressive buffs to firing cycle haste and bonus damage. Sentry mode. Not gonna lie, this is the whole reason I decided to make this a Ba'ul Antiproton build. You've probably seen me use this before. Sentry mode roots you in place, summons a bunch of sentry ships, and fire a bunch of Ba'ul refraction beams all over the place. So not only does it stick to the whole 360-degree arc gimmick, but the root actually adds to the whole lazy aspect of the Lazy Boat. The Dynamic Power Redistributor Module, aka the DPRM. Its click gives massive buffs to bonus damage and hull regen. It's the best console in the game, of course I'm going to use this. Here we have our standard DPS build Lobi consoles, Tachyokinetic Converter for the crit chance and crit severity, and Bioneural Infusion Circuits for its massive crit severity buff. And finally in the tactical consoles, just a bunch of vulnerability locators for their weapons damage buff and their crit chance. My skill tree hasn't changed at all, it's still the same one I copied from Augmented Dictator games. Feel free to pause here to get a closer look at it. Now the personal space traits. Adaptive Offense because it's a crit chance buff that turns into a crit severity buff and then back to a crit chance buff. It's pretty nice. Superior Cannon Training because turrets are basically just omni cannons, so this is going to buff them. Context is for Kings for the bonus damage buff. Fleet Coordinator for another bonus damage buff that scales based on the size of your team. Fragment of AI Tech, which is a nice energy weapon damage buff that's based off of your control expertise skill. Innocuous for the reduced threat generation and a little bit of crit severity. Inspirational Leader because it buffs most of your starship skills every time you use a bridge officer ability. Intel Agent Attaché to reduce my captain's abilities cooldowns. Unconventional Systems to shave a little bit of time off those cooldowns on my universal consoles. And Terran Targeting Systems for the crit severity buff. In the starship traits, first we have Emergency Weapons Cycle for its reduced weapons power cost and its buff to firing cycle haste. This is a must-have trait for energy weapon builds. Overpowered and Overgunned does pretty much the same thing as the last trait. It improves your weapons power cost and your firing cycle haste, but its duration is determined by your crit chance. Strike from Shadows. When you're shooting at an enemy that isn't shooting at you, you get a little bit of bonus damage, a little bit of crit chance, and a nice reduction to threat generation. Improve critical systems because it's a little bit of extra crit chance and a little bit of extra crit severity. Terran Goodbye because it gives a lot of crit chance. And Withering Barrage, which extends the duration of Cannon Scatter Volley, which is going to be kind of the backbone of this build. This trait is pretty easy to have at this point because it comes off of like 8 different ships, one of which was recently given away for free during the KDF recruitment event. In the Space Reputation traits, we've got Advanced Targeting Systems for the crit severity buff, Controlled Countermeasures for the bonus damage against controlled targets, Magnified Firepower for the bonus weapon damage, Precision for the crit chance, and Tyler's Duality also for crit chance. Now the Bridge Officer seating. First we've got Distributed Targeting 1, because when you move Chemosite up to the Lieutenant seat, it's a bit of a struggle to find useful tactical abilities for the Ensign seats. Attack Pattern Beta 1 for the debuff. Then in the other Universal seat we've got Tractor Beam. This is really just here to trigger unconventional systems. In the Tactical seat, first we've got Beam Overload 1. This may seem strange, but remember I am using an Omni Beam, and even that Omni Beam under Beam Overload 1 is going to do more damage than Tactical Team will ever do for me. Chemosite Lace Weaponry 2 for the extra radiation damage to my weapons, and Cannon Scatter Volley 2 because I can't fit Cannon Scatter Volley 3 on a cruiser. Now in what I'm using more as a Miracle Worker seat than an actual engineering seat, Destabilize Warp Core 1. This puts a radiation dot on a target, and when that target dies, this will cause a second explosion that will deal a nice kinetic AoE. Next is Aux to Bat, because I am using 3 technicians to reduce my Bridge Officer cooldowns. Narrow Sensor Bands 3. This is the main reason why I like Miracle Worker seating so much. It gives a huge amount of bonus damage to your energy weapons based on your distance to your target. Mixed Armament Synergy 3, the other reason why I like Miracle Worker so much. Activating a beam, cannon, mine, or torpedo will buff the other 3 damage types significantly, meaning my Omni Beam is going to be buffing my turrets, and vice versa. Down in the other engineering seat, we've got Let It Go 1 for the debuff, my second Aux to Bat, because you need 2 of them to get the most out of those technicians, and Emergency Power to Weapons 3 for the bonus damage, the weapons power, but it's mostly there to trigger Emergency Weapon Cycle. Now the Duty Officers. Like I said earlier, I've got the 3 technicians for the cooldowns with Aux to Bat. Up here I've got 24 of 47, who gives me a chance to max out my power levels for 5 seconds every time I activate a tactical ability, and gives me a chance to buff my critical chance every time I activate a Miracle Worker ability. Next is 19 of 47, who has the same power level buff, but this one triggers off of engineering abilities instead. This one also has the chance to improve my armor pen on my weapons every time I activate a Miracle Worker ability. And lastly, an Energy Weapon Officer to improve my crit severity. There were a couple changes I thought about doing while making this build. I really would have liked to put this on an escort to get access to Cannon Scatter Volley 3, but I also really wanted to stick to a ship that had 8 weapon slots so I can maximize the number of refractions I'd be getting from the Ba'ul weapons, so that would have limited me to warships. I also really wanted to stick to a Miracle Worker ship so I could have Mixed Armament Synergy and Narrow Sensor Bands. Currently, the only warship with Miracle Worker seating in Star Trek Online is the Jem'Hadar Vanguard warship, which isn't even a full Miracle Worker ship. Its only Miracle Worker seat only goes up to Lieutenant Commander, meaning I would have to use a lesser version of Mixed Armament Synergy. Also, I would have had to buy the Vanguard warship, because I don't own it. I'd love to swap out improved critical systems for Weapon Emitter Overdrive, but I don't have 1.7 billion for the Vodwar Juggernaut. The price of promo ships is really getting out of control. Promise of Ferocity would also be a good substitute, but I don't have that ship either. At least that one's from a C-Store ship. While Sentry Mode is probably my favorite console on this build, it's certainly not the most necessary. Polymorphic Probe Array makes an excellent budget alternative. It has the same passive stat buffs, but actually with better numbers, and its click doesn't have a firing arc, so it still fits the whole 360-degree gimmick. Also, don't feel like you're restricted to anti-proton for this kind of build. Only 2 of these consoles buff anti-proton damage specifically, so with only a couple minor alterations, you could easily adapt this to any energy weapon type.
Scanning the nanite. Gone. Additional data available.
241k in an ISE run. That's not bad for a meme boat that's not running any torpedoes. I did do some testing early on with this build with the Dark Matter Quantum Torpedo equipped. My DPS went up significantly, like around the 280 to 300k mark. However, a torpedo did break the whole 360-degree arc gimmick, so I had to ditch it. But I figured I should point it out for anyone who wants to do a bit more DPS on something like this, but doesn't feel like restricting it to the theme like I am. In the player analysis, you can see the turrets did 113k under Scatter Volley 2. Really wish I can get Scatter Volley 3 on this, but it's a cruiser, so it's not going to happen. Entropic Rider did 23k, not bad for a specialization skill. This is why we keep that Fakiri Torment engine on. And the Ba'ul Omnibeam did nearly 7k under Beam Overload 1. Yeah, way more valuable than Tactical Team 1. So yeah, that's the Lazy Boat. It's very much a meme build, but it works better than I ever thought it would. It's certainly not a record breaker, but it's weird and it's goofy and it makes me smile, so if that's something that appeals to you, I hope you enjoyed this. Big thanks to a fleet mate of mine, Postal, who gave me about half of these Ba'ul turrets when Ba'ul was still new. Sorry it took me so long to use. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff down below. I'd really appreciate it. My name's Stu, and you guys, the T6 Overth is finally happening. We did it! We won! We won! Woohoo!